Chapter 4, Afterthoughts. So this is technically the second time I've recorded this audiobook. I recorded it last summer, and for a variety of reasons, I decided to re-record it again. And what I think is really interesting is the same thing is happening as it did on the first record, as it's happening on the second record. And that is, I can feel the shift in how I'm feeling, because the first few chapters, I know I've got a little bit before we get into the gunk, if you will. And I know chapter 4 is where we get into the gunk. And to this day, that first day that in the chapter I just read, the first day, the day of the incident, as I am calling it, is in so many ways, and if I'm being really honest with myself, I think it is the hardest day of that whole summer, because it was the day that like everything changed. You know, I didn't do this on purpose, but it's interesting in hindsight that I called this chapter The Incident, because in so many ways, if you've wrote books or wrote movies or have studied story structure at all, there's something called the inciting incident. So this is the moment where, you know, Peter Parker gets bit by the spider. You know, he's no longer just Peter Parker. He's now Peter Parker in Spider-Man. If you're a Twilight nerd, like I was growing up, this is when Bella meets Edward. You know, she's no longer, you know, Bella who never met Edward. Now she's Bella who had met Edward, which puts her life on a totally different trajectory. For Harry Potter, this would be when, you know, Voldemort, Avada Kedavra, whatever, his parents, there's these incidents where the character or the person goes through, because I truly believe the reason we resonate with characters and story structure so deeply is because of the truth that is real life. And movies and books and whatever just condense that into a shorter time frame than the scope of our lives. But in our lives, we have inciting incidents all the time. We have these incidents that happen in our lives where we are no longer, there was the person we were prior to that incident, and there was the person we are post that incident. And so it's interesting in hindsight that I titled this chapter The Incident, because in so many ways that was an inciting incident in my life. And that's why it's so hard, because there was a Michaela before that day, and now very clearly there's a Michaela after that day. And for me, there was also my relationship with Todd before that day, and then there becomes the relationship with him after, and it's two totally different. And for me, when I really boiled down what was hardest about this experience, the whole experience that summer with Todd, that day, it does come down to betrayal. And that moment was, to me, the day of like ultimate betrayal. And that's what's so hard. So I really think, if I really was being honest with myself with everything, that day was the hardest day of the whole summer. And so I find it interesting. And one of the promises I made, as I've talked to you about in earlier afterthoughts, was I was going to stay honest. I was going to stay authentic, and I was going to let it be imperfect. Back to that like flawless conversation. Like it is perfect, but it's not necessarily flawless. And reading that chapter in the first time I recorded the audiobook, and then now I find myself making the most mistakes. And there's a part of me that wants to go back and wants to correct it and just reread it until I don't miss a word or mess up or have to reread a line or whatever it is. And seeing it as not flawless, but as perfect, meaning it is the way it is. I'm like, that is actually perfect that I'm reading it the way I'm reading it, because it's allowing those emotions to come through of like, I'm stumbling through that chapter, as in real life, I was stumbling through that experience, and it really created a big stumble in my emotions in that. And so again, it's really hard for me to leave it like that. And I really think that there is some power into it being that way, because it is a very real mirror of how I was feeling that day and stumbling in those incidents. But it's like, now reading it, I know what's coming. What really shocked me in that moment was I obviously had no idea what was coming. As I read to you, like I was on the high of a lifetime. I was having just such a beautiful day. You know, when you struggle with something for so long, and for me with horses being so important and such a priority to me, like that day was huge for me to have been struggling with something for so long to figure it out, but then also to have this beautiful ride on this horse that I love. And, you know, it's just this feeling of euphoria. Like I felt euphoric. And as I said, like I wasn't calm as a cucumber. That smile could have painted the sky from the East Coast to the West Coast. Like I was just so happy. And so to be in that state of just pure bliss and euphoria, and then to have someone come in that I trusted, and like I had said in the earlier chapters, I really looked up to as a grandfather figure, to like go to give him a hug goodbye, which was a pretty standard thing. And for him to like grab my boob was just so traumatized, like so shocking, so traumatizing, and so just earth shattering. And the difference now is like, I know what's coming. And so that's where like those stumbles and reading the words and the emotions start to come in. It's like, I know what's coming. And it's the part of me, I think, that wants to rewrite the story, right? That wants to gloss over this part and just pretend like, oh, that summer was great. I had riding lessons. This guy was like my grandfather, and it was so cool and it was beautiful. And it's like, that's just not how the story went. And so, but now that I know that's coming, it's like those emotions start to rise sooner in the anticipation. And obviously I know the story. I live the story. This story lives in my memory bank, but like, I still don't love reading it. Like I still don't love going through that in so many ways. And so it's like in the anticipation, I start, like my energy dies down. I start to go into that a little bit more. And I really am making myself, again, allow myself to stumble and allow that to be a part of the story, because that makes the story even more powerful. So with that, thank you for stumbling through that, with that through me with that, you know what I mean? We got some more stumbles to get to, so let's get to them.